Okay, so we've already learned how to identify whether equations are parallel or perpendicular. Keep in mind, or reminder is, parallel equations are ones that have the same slope. Boom, boom, boom. And perpendicular equations are the ones that have opposite reciprocal slopes. Okay, so when we're writing equations though, we have to keep this in mind. And let's just dive into it. So example 1, they want us to write an equation of the line that passes through the point -2, 7 and is parallel to the line y equals -4x plus 1. So they gave me a point, okay, and they want us to find a new equation that is parallel to this old equation and goes through this point. So what we have to do is first identify what that slope would be. Well, if it's parallel, then I know it's going to have the same slope as this equation. And the slope of this equation is -4. Okay, so I know the slope of the other equation is going to be -4. So we are going to use the coordinate they gave us, the ordered pair, and the slope. Point slope. So since they gave us a point and the slope, we're going to use the point slope formula. So remember, this is y, the opposite of y is -7, equals the slope, -4, parentheses x, the opposite of -2 is to add 2, okay? Then we're going to solve for y. So the first thing we do is distribute. Y -7 equals -4 times x is -4x. -4 times 2 is -8. I got to add 7 to both sides. So y equals -4x. -8 plus 7 is -1. And this is our new equation. It has the same slope as the other equation, just a different y-intercept. But if I were to graph this equation, I know it would go through the point -2, 7 from my point slope formula. So let's do this again. If I do they want us to write the equation of the line that passes through the point 3, -1 and is parallel to the line x minus 3y equals 9. Well, parallel means same slope, but they gave it to me in standard form. I cannot identify the slope if it's in standard form. So we have to first convert this standard form into slope-intercept form. So how I do that is I solve for y. So the first thing I do is subtract x. So -3y equals, put the x first, so -x plus 9. Divide by -3 to everything. So y equals -1 divided by -3 is +1 over 3x, and +9 over -3 is -3. Now the reason why I had to convert from standard to slope-intercept form is because we need to identify the slope. And the slope of the equation is 1/3. This is the information I need because parallel means same slope. So we're going to keep the same slope, but we're going to go through the point 3, -1. So we're going to use point slope again. So y, the opposite of -1 is to add 1, equals the slope, which is 1/3 x, parentheses x, and the opposite of +3 is to subtract 3. So now I distribute and solve for y. So y plus 1 equals 1/3 x. 1/3 times -3 is -1. Then I'm going to subtract 1. So y equals 1/3 x. -1 minus 1 is -2. And this is my new equation because it has the same slope and a different y-intercept. And if I were to graph this equation, I would go through the point 3, -1. So we've done parallel. Now let's see if we can do perpendicular. Remember, perpendicular means opposite reciprocal slopes. So if I look at example 3, they want us to write an equation of the line that passes through the point 4, 3 and is perpendicular to y equals 2x minus 4. Well, since it's in slope-intercept form, 2 is the slope. But remember, perpendicular means I'm not going to use 2. I have to do the opposite reciprocal of 2. And the opposite reciprocal of +2 is -1/2. Now this is the slope I'm going to use in the point slope form. So y, the opposite of +3 is to subtract 3, equals the slope, -1/2, parentheses x, the opposite of +4 is to subtract 4. Then I distribute and solve, so y minus 3 equals -1/2 x. Negative 1/2 times negative 4 is positive 2. Then I'm going to add 3 to both sides. So y equals negative 1/2 x. Positive 2 plus 3 is plus 5. So this is my new equation. It is the opposite reciprocal of positive 2 because negative 1/2 and positive 2 are opposite reciprocals. If I were to graph this, it would go through the point 4, 3. Let's do it again. This time, so we're still perpendicular, so we need to find the opposite reciprocal, but I can't do that yet until I solve for y in slope-intercept form to identify the slope. So first, I'm going to subtract 5x to both sides. So 3y equals negative 5x minus 21. Divide by 3 to everything. So y equals negative 5 over 3 simplifies to negative 5 over 3x. Negative 21 divided by 3 is negative 7. This is the slope I need to identify, negative 5/3. But wait, negative 5/3 we don't need to use because we're not trying to find parallel, we're trying to find perpendicular. And the opposite reciprocal of negative 5/3 is positive 3/5. This is the slope we're going to use. So y, the opposite of y, positive 1 is minus 1, equals the slope 3/5 x. Opposite of negative 5 is to add 5. Now I distribute and solve, so y minus 1 equals 3/5 x. 3/5 times 5 is positive 3. I'm going to add 1 to both sides, so y equals 3/5 x. Positive 3 minus 1 is plus 2. So how I know these are perpendicular lines is because they're opposite reciprocals of each other. If I were to graph this, it would go through the point negative 5, 1. Okay, so we're going to keep practicing given just more examples, okay? So if I look at number 1, they want to, or 1 through 4 is focusing on parallel, okay? So parallel means same slope. So first thing we need to make sure is that we are in slope-intercept form, okay? Y equals mx plus b. Since we are going to pull the slope from this equation, okay? That's the slope we're going to be using. Since it's parallel, that means that's the same slope, so we're going to leave it 2. And now we're going to use point slope formula to find the new equation. So y, the opposite of positive or negative 1 is positive 1, equals the slope 2, parentheses x, the opposite of negative 4 is plus 4. Then I'm going to distribute and solve. So 2 times x is 2x, 2 times 4 is positive 8, minus 1 to both sides. So y equals 2x plus 7. There's my equation. I know it's parallel because they have the same slope. If I were to graph it, it would go through the point negative 4, negative 1. Number 2, it is already in slope-intercept form, so all I have to do is pull out the slope, which is negative 1/4. We're going to keep it the same slope because we're looking for parallel. So y, the opposite of positive 3 is to subtract 3. Equals the slope, negative 1/4, parentheses x, the opposite of positive 8 is to subtract 8. Then I'm going to distribute. Negative 1/4 times x is negative 1/4 x. Negative 1/4 times negative 8 is positive 2. Then I'm going to add 3 to both sides. So y equals negative 1/4 x plus 5 because 2 plus 3 is 5. They are parallel because they have the same slope, and if I were to graph this, it would go through the point 8, 3. Now 3 and 4, I have to convert because they gave me the equation in standard form. Well, I can't identify the slope if it's in standard form, so we first need to solve for y, okay? So I'm going to subtract x to both sides. Negative 2y equals negative x plus 14. Divide by negative 2 to everything. So y equals negative 1 over negative 2 simplifies to 1 over 2. And positive 14 over negative 2 simplifies to negative 7. So all we do from this is pull the slope. This is the slope. And since we are looking for parallel, that means I'm going to keep it 1/2. So now I'm going to use that in point slope, and I'm going to do the opposite of positive 5 is minus 5, equals the slope 1/2, parentheses x, the opposite of positive 4 is minus 4. Then I'm going to distribute and solve, so y minus 5 equals 1/2 x. 1/2 times negative 4 is minus 2. I'm going to add 5 to both sides. So y equals 1/2 x. Negative 2 plus 5 is positive 3. So this is my final answer. Number 4, again, we need to convert to slope-intercept form, so I'm going to subtract 5x to both sides. 2y equals negative 5x plus 10. I'm going to divide everything by 2, so y equals negative 5 over 2 simplifies to negative 5 over 2x, and positive 10 over 2 simplifies to 5. All I need is the slope from this equation, the negative 5 over 2. We are going to keep it negative 5 over 2 because we want the same slope for parallel. So then I'm going to do my point slope formula. The opposite of positive 7 is to subtract 7. Equals the slope, negative 5 over 2, parentheses x, the opposite of negative 6 is to add 6. Then I'm going to distribute and solve. So negative 5 over 2x. Negative 5 over 2 times 6 is negative 15. Then I'm going to add 7 to both sides. Y equals negative 5 over 2x. Negative 15 plus 7 is minus 8. And this is my final answer. Okay, so we've done parallel, which means same slope, point slope formula to find the new equation. So we're going to continue by practicing perpendicular. Again, just remember perpendicular means opposite reciprocal slopes. So if I look at number 5, they gave it to me in slope-intercept form, so we're going to leave it this way. I'm going to pull out the slope, which is 3 over 4. But since we're looking for perpendicular, that means we're looking for the opposite reciprocal. The opposite of positive is negative, and the reciprocal of 3/4 is 4/3. So this is actually the slope we're going to be using. Y, the opposite of negative 3 is to add 3, equals the slope, negative 4 over 3x. The opposite of positive 3 is minus 3. Then I'm going to distribute and solve. So negative 4/3 x. Negative 4/3 times negative 3 is positive 4. Then I'm going to subtract 3. So y equals negative 4/3 x. Positive 4 minus 3 is positive 1. And here is my new equation. The slopes are opposite reciprocals, okay, from the original. And if I graphed it, it would go through the point 3, negative 3. Number 6, the slope that I would pull from the slope-intercept form would be positive 1. The opposite reciprocal of positive 1 is negative 1. So in my point slope formula, y, the opposite of negative 2 is adding 2. The new slope would be negative 1 parentheses x. The opposite of negative 3 would be to add 3. Then I'm going to distribute. So y plus 2 equals negative 1 times x is negative 1x. Negative 1 times 3 is negative 3. I'm going to subtract 2 to both sides. So y equals negative 1x. Negative 3 minus 2 is minus 5. Again, they will write this without the 1, so it would be negative x minus 5. And there's my final equation. Now, for these last two, though, they are in standard form, which means to identify the slope, we need to convert it to slope-intercept form. So let's solve for y. I'm going to first subtract 2x to both sides. So 10y equals negative 2x plus 20. I'm going to divide by 10 to everything. So y equals negative 2 over 10 is negative 1/5 x. Positive 20 over 10 is positive 2. The only reason I needed to convert it was to get the slope. The slope of this equation is negative 1/5. But since we're talking about reciprocals or perpendicular, then we need the opposite reciprocal. The opposite of negative is positive, and the reciprocal of 1/5 is 5 over 1, which is just 5. So 5 is the slope we're going to be using. So y, the opposite of positive 3 is minus 3. The new slope, which is 5, parentheses x, the opposite of positive 2 is minus 2. Then I'm going to distribute. So 5 times x is 5x. 5 times negative 2 is minus 10. I'm going to add 3 to both sides. So y equals 5x minus 7, because negative 10 plus 3 is 7. And here is my final equation. My slopes are perpendicular because they're opposite reciprocals. If I were to graph this, it would go through the point 2, 3. Let's do one last one. First, we need to convert to slope-intercept form. So we're going to solve by subtracting x first. So 3y equals negative x plus 6. I'm going to divide everything by 3. So y equals negative 1/3 x. Positive 6 over 3 is positive 2. The only reason we convert is so we can identify the slope, which is negative 1/3. The opposite reciprocal of negative 1/3 is the opposite of negative is positive, and the reciprocal of 1/3 is 3 over 1, which in turn is just 3. So we're going to use 3 as the new slope. So y, the opposite of negative 6 is to add 6, equals the new slope 3, parentheses x, the opposite of negative 1 is to add 1. Then we're going to distribute. 3 times x is 3x, 3 times 1 is positive 3. I'm going to subtract 6 to both sides, so y equals 3x. Positive 3 minus 6 is minus 3. This is my final equation. They are opposite reciprocals of each other, and if I were to graph it, it would go through the point -1, -6.